Okay, good morning, everyone, or almost good afternoon, depending on where you're calling or joining us from. See people streaming in. This is going to be a fun webinar for sure. And we are super excited to have one of our dear and almost very long time customers, one of our oldest customers, Chris Giudotti, joining us. So my name is Paul. We got Brian here with us. And today we are talking, morning, Brian. This morning we are talking about stop expediting everything. You know, it's probably not sort of an unknown thing that in a lot of shops, there's constantly firefighting mode happening, right? There's emergencies that come up, there's last minute struggles that cause panic, and it's stressful and it's expensive. And we're going to talk about some strategies today to eliminate that in your shop, just using concepts and thoughts that you can use in your own tools. And of course, we're going to talk about how that's easier on ProShop as well. Good morning, Keith. Yeah, I was just going to say as well, feel free to throw in the chat where you're joining us from. I know Keith's down in Orange County. I know we have a mix of clients on here and then people that are not clients yet. So Ripley, New York, right on Western PA. Right. Fantastic.
Well, while people are streaming in, I'll cover a little bit of the housekeeping here. So yeah, if you just want to say hi, give a shout out, go ahead and use the chat feature for that. Through the presentation today, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature within the Zoom window. That's going to make it a lot easier for us to track those questions and try to answer them sort of in sequence. Other than that, we will be providing the recording of this session later on. After we get a chance to sort of review it, etc. And then any other attachments or any of the other things that we might need to include, those will also be coming your way. Did I miss anything there, Paul?
I think that's pretty good. Yep.
Okay.
All right. And so for those that have joined our webinars before, you'll notice this is not my normal background. I am calling in from a tiny little cabin on the shores of Whidbey Island, Washington. Just had a small little getaway with my wife. So hopefully the internet holds here. It seems to be pretty good so far. So, all right. Well, we got a pretty full house. Let's keep moving on here.
All right.
All right. So what does firefighting really mean to here, right? So again, it's pretty ubiquitous in almost every shop I've certainly run across. It means that you are having to spend money, whether it's expediting fees at your outside processors or overnighting, a cutting tool in or shipping the parts to your client overnight, or heaven forbid, even like hiring a courier or something to drive some parts. I was just talking to someone last week who said they had to hire 2 different couriers for the same job, and it just completely wiped out all the profit margin that they had. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get out of that loop.
All right.
And I love this quote. And actually, Brian, when you were researching this quote yesterday, tell us what this is actually in reference to.
So this is actually in reference to the firefighting in Pennsylvania. I apologize, I don't remember the year. I'm terrible with history, but
Philadelphia, I think.
Philadelphia, thank you. Basically, Benjamin Franklin had come out and said, hey, look, this fire's coming, and if we do a little bit to help prevent our houses and buildings from burning, we will come out much better in the end. And that's true for what we're talking about today. So this seemed to be a very, very appropriate quote as we sort of talk about expediting and managing all the fires that everyone has in the shops and in companies, that we would kind of be able to pull from his wisdom there.
Yeah, we've all heard that quote, but I didn't know it was actually about firefighting. So it's actually pretty hilarious. And so what are some of the outcomes that we're going to be able to get from this is we are going to be able to have, I can't even see the dots right there. We're going to be more profitable, right? If you're not just spending money on all these fees, you're going to spend less time working late, stressing out, take more vacation. This picture is actually from a client of ours that tagged us while he was down in Mexico. With ProShop on his laptop there, just chilling out while the shop is running smoothly. So yeah, these things are all possible. And we will cover some ways to do that today.
Right. All right. So we have a short case study from a customer of ours, Pioneer Cuts. Basically, Paul, I don't know if you want to go through the, I know
Sure.
that you
Yeah.
worked directly with them, so.
And there's a, we might be able to put it in the chat. There's actually, this is all from a video that they did with us. So when we were talking about the ROI they had for ProShop, they shared with us that in the first quarter of last year, they spent $5,200 in expediting fees to various things like I described, outside processors, overnight shipping. You pull the next bullet up. Yeah. So then they implemented ProShop. And then after that, they were still just as busy. In fact, they even shipped more jobs, but they spent considerably less on expediting fees. And that's what their ProShop license was. So they were definitely money ahead just on this one thing alone, let alone all the other benefits they saw. And Chris, when we have Chris chime in a little later, he's going to share us some of the things with his company. So you can go to the next slide there, Brian. So yeah, we're not going to read this out verbatim, but we can throw that video in the chat, and you can watch that a little later if you'd like. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Sarah. All right, let's move along. So there's a few different places where we're really going to kind of hone in on where you can do different things at different phases of a job. So we'll definitely talk about, you know, how you're going to do this and sort of set yourself up for success in the estimating process, when you're entering brand new jobs, when you're planning those jobs out, getting it ready for production, and then actually during the production process itself. So there's things you can do at every one of these phases that can really help to minimize that expediting fee later in the process. Yeah. All right, so first of all, we're going to go in a couple of example slides here, but it's crucially important to try to eliminate tribal knowledge from the sales and estimating team when you have a new job, you know, moving into the shop. And of course, this starts at the estimating process. So if you want to move to the next slide there, Brian. Here's just a couple of examples of things that you can do to help people find information later, so they're not having to track you down, not having to be delayed in what they need to do with their jobs. So, and this is an example of a material quote from a vendor that's linked right into the material price section of an estimate. And it's super easy to just attach it there. That then will flow all the way through the part creation process onto the work order where purchasing can see it, and they can very quickly and easily go purchase the material they need without having to hunt you down or send you an email and ask for something. And every tiny little touch point that removes lead time and removes waiting and waste will ultimately give you time back at the end that you don't have to expedite.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important part about addressing expediting and firefighting, so to speak, at the very early stages in your process. Essentially, what we sometimes miss, especially as we're in the moment, as we're doing all the fighting, is that we got to where we are because of everything that happened before that. So that does include stuff that happens at the front door when we take on new projects or we quote new projects. If we're not really cognizant about how we're going to do that, how we're going to fit it in, how we're going to pass information along, then eventually all of those tiny little things build up into sort of a big ball, and that's that big ball of yarn that we have to untangle when we're further down in the process. So that's why when we start at the estimating phase and think about how can I enter information like this, how can I make sure that when the purchasing agent gets this job, they know exactly what to purchase, they see the quote, they don't have to ask me, I don't have to be interrupted from what I was doing to provide them the quote from the vendor, and they can just move right along and just trim out all of that time that Paul just mentioned.
Yep. So here's obviously if there's lots of ways to, whether it's through shared folders or some other method, there's lots of ways to, you know, capture that information, put it in an accessible place that other people can see later on in their process. So here's another section. This is it's actually a screen grab from ProShop, obviously. It's called process development. And this is on an estimate. And it's a place where we can capture relevant and pertinent information that we really don't want to lose later in the process. So one of the ones that we see there highlighted is like, we need to buy a custom ground tool. It takes 3 weeks to get it. So when this estimate gets converted into an actual job, the person that's doing purchasing or planning or doing the manufacturing engineering for that job will be able to see that note right away, and get that tool on order with as much lead time as possible, as opposed to waiting until a couple of weeks later when they're programming the job and they realize, oh no, we don't have this tool, and you're rushing it, you're expediting it, you're getting it overnight. So if you can have some kind of system to document those kind of gotchas, right, so they don't actually get you, that's just another way you can help to be a little bit more proactive in your planning process, and make sure those things don't slip through the cracks and bite you at the last minute.
Right, right. So part of it is being able to document, and then the other part, which we'll see a little bit later on, is how does anyone else in the process, planner, programmer, purchasing agent, and so on, how do they know that it's there? So you have to be thinking about building that into the review process or the planning or programming process, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah, this is another important one. So obviously, a lot of jobs have to go out for outside processes, right? Things you're not doing inside your own facility. Could be anodized like this one, could be heat treating, could be grinding, who knows what it might be. In this case, we're capturing the actual lead time that our vendors have quoted. Now, obviously these days, lead times are quite variable, but capturing a conservative number, something that is likely to sort of cover from when a job leaves your dock to when it comes back to your facility, through that round trip through an outside process. In this case, in ProShop, we're going to be calculating different sort of shipping dates and when jobs need to leave to go out to processing. So capturing that early on in the process in some mechanism, so you can then see that, everyone can see the transparency of what that looks like, is really important. And that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, and then you'll notice that in this case, we actually have multiple options here. So on the right-hand side, we've chosen sort of the middle of the road, the 7-day lead time, and that's the lead time that we quote with. That's the lead time that the job is going to be built with. However, if later on we do get into a scenario where we really need to trim out a couple of days, we can just go right to the original estimate and see, well, there was another option. It was a little bit more expensive, but you know what that's going to cost, rather than maybe having your standard option, in this case ASCO. Maybe rather than having them run an expedite fee, it might be cheaper to go with Apex, because at the price that they have and the lead time, it might be a better option. So again, you've documented all of that. Nobody has to go and redo that work. Nobody has to bug you for it, because it's all built in, and you'll be able to make the decisions along the way very quickly.
Yep. And in that case, you can also see that there were links to those vendor quotes right there as well. So those are always available when you need to pull them up and see all the specifics.
Right, right.
Yeah. And then, of course, one of the really big ones that I think a lot of companies are guilty of is they don't know what their capacity is, and they quote lead times that are actually shorter than they can deliver. So what we're seeing here is an example of what we call a phantom job, or sort of a placeholder that's inserted in between actual jobs. And in this case, on the left-hand side there, those jobs that are highlighted in red in the background are actually telling us that if we did insert this job, the one with the blue bars, it actually will make our other jobs late, right? That's why they're turning red, because they're actually have been shifted out past the date that they need to go to outside process or wherever they're going to next.
Yeah,
but
subsequent process and operation internally, whatever it is. Yeah, it's calculated there. Yep.
Yeah. So through whatever scheduling tool you're using, really trying to understand what your capacities are like, and make sure that you are quoting realistic lead times is a crucial part of not getting yourself in trouble later. I know some people sometimes have the tendency to want to quote a fast lead time so they can win that work and then beg forgiveness later. But I would argue that that's not the best long-term strategy for happy customers, and getting repeat orders from those same customers. So it's always good to be a little conservative in this area, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this technique was actually something that we did a lot, where we identified, okay, the customer really needs it. They're willing to pay an expedite fee, and it may not be an expedite just for what I need to process this job on, it could be an expedite to accommodate the other two projects, whether it's pulling in overtime or expediting an external process like anodizing or something like that. So having the visibility to see if you do have to, or if your customer's willing to pay expedite, that it's not just their job. We also need to be thinking of the other jobs that it's displacing here. So just different things that come into play there.
Yeah, great point. That was actually when I was prepping for actually our next webinar. I was talking to one of our customers. I don't see him on the meeting today, but they are a quick turn shop. That's kind of what they're known for. And so he's almost always quoting expediting fees and NRE charges to his clients. But more and more often now, because they've cut out so much lead time out of their process using ProShop, he just keeps that money and he doesn't actually have to spend it with the vendor. So he's still hitting the lead times and dates that he's promised, but he's actually just keeping that extra money. So it's become a profit center as opposed to a cost center from him. All right, so now we've talked a little bit about estimating. Now we're gonna get into order entry and planning and the rest of the process. So there's a number of benefits of making sure that you are cutting out as much lead time and doing sort of these planning processes. And one of the things that we're going to talk about here, and we're on this soapbox all the time, is getting rid of paper out of your process, right? There are so many benefits. You can parallel process jobs. Maybe we can go to the next slide there, Brian. You can have things like built-in contract review processes. Well, I guess I'm sure many shops can relate to this. When you get a job in a traditional paper-based system, right? Whoever does that order entry process is going to enter that order in. They're going to print out the job traveler or possibly multiple copies of it, depending on your situation, and then put that on the desk of the next person that needs to do something, right? Maybe the accounting department needs to verify that they don't have, a bunch of AR. Or someone in scheduling needs to check their part of the process, or engineering needs to do their thing. But when a traveler is physically moving from desk to desk and waiting in queue in people's inboxes, that is a potential for all sorts of waste and mistakes. So that's one of the things that we're trying to eliminate with going with a paperless process.
Right. Yeah. And a great example of that is scheduling can work on understanding, trying to meet the dates while the accounting team is working on the terms, right? It can all be done at the same time. Nobody has to wait for that folder, like you said, to hit their desk or their inbox. It's just there and part of their standard work and part of their working queue.
Yep. Yeah, do you want to take this one, Brian?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned that being able to identify things in estimating or at any point along the process is going to be critical to answering those and being able to plan around all of those humps in the road and get things on track. And a checklist is a great way to do that. So a checklist is essentially just a way to recognize the things that we do on a regular basis. So as a planner, every job that I plan, I go through a standard process, whether I have a checklist or not. I know what I'm doing. I've done it for years and years, whatever it is. But if I actually take the time and jot it down for every job that I do and just mark it off real quick, I know whether or not I've done it. I can get in and prioritize like what we've done here. You can see on the left-hand side, everything that's in the red section is priority 1. So I know that stuff needs to get done right away. And then priority 2 and 3, and then maybe the shop floor stuff, those can all be done sequentially a little bit later on as schedule allows. But I know here, based on my checklist, and this is something that in ProShop we just have as a default, you can set it up by different job types. So prototype jobs have a different list than a repeat job, etc. But I know when I get a brand new project, I have to get everything that's in the priority 1 section done as soon as possible, because that is all the lead time sensitive stuff. I need to verify that I have the right revisions and the right documents for my customer. I need to verify that my tools get queued for ordering, or my material or bill of material items. All of those things that could potentially have lead time and disrupt, especially in the world that we are now with our supply chain management. I need to get all of those things done right away. And then once I'm done with that, okay, we can take a step back. We can allow the schedule to dictate priority 2, priority 3, and like I said, shop floor, et cetera, along the way. And of course, the visibility here, that's another thing. And we'll talk about visibility in a bit.
Yeah. So one of the things that you may seem pretty obvious, but when you're able to reduce lead time at the beginning of your process, it just gives you more time for the manufacturing, right? And everyone knows that their customers are probably, their engineers are always taking too long to engineer their parts. So it's the machine shops and the suppliers that get crunched at the end. But internally, you can do that same thing, right? You can try to cut out all the upfront lead time, minimize the risk of those last minute scrambles, and actually start making your parts sooner. I think Chris will chime in on this a little bit later, because I think they cut about, or Chris, are you there with us? Didn't you cut something like a week out of your initial sort of upfront lead time?
Yeah, it was anywhere from a couple of days to at least a week.
And that just gave you more time for the actual machining process, right?
Yeah, and if we did run into a problem with machining, we were able to get tooling without expediting charges. So, you know, you have an extra week on the back end. So if something does happen, you may not need to pay those expediting fees that traditionally, because the job is almost late, you just have to start paying out, you know, for all these, you know, UPS red charges. But because we started so much earlier, any problems have a little bit more time to get solved than before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Choosing where to wait, right?
Yeah, so this is what we're trying to avoid, people. We're trying to avoid big piles of papers in your inbox. If you follow the lean, Toyota production system, waiting is an enormous waste. And then, of course, I'm sure lots of shops can relate to the whole situation where you actually lose a traveler entirely and you forget that you had that job in the first place, and you don't realize it until your customer calls you up and they say, "Hey, where's my parts?" Right? That is a terrible nightmare situation.
Yeah, and this I love this picture because it's a perfect example of when somebody in a paper style system, when somebody later on in the process, maybe it's purchasing, needs to do something, they need to buy material or they need to buy tooling, they come to your desk, they interrupt you, you have to sift through your stack of stuff, find the folder, hand it to them, and then they can get on with it. So that, I mean, okay, it can only take a few minutes, but every time you do that, every job that's ever done on, that just adds incredible amounts of time to your overall process. So just the inefficiencies are just mind-boggling when you can take a step back and look at them and evaluate what benefits you have if you change your system around a little bit.
So Chris, I think you wanted to say a couple of comments about this particular thing in your shop.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the last slide real quick, because we had a couple situations where we were doubling the work. So we would often print 2 travelers, one for purchasing and one for, say, programming. And now you've got 2 pieces of paper that determine the workflow. So I would be working on something and then somebody would try to help me out and also work on the same thing. And because it's paper, it's not getting updated. Nobody knew we were both working on the same thing. Mm-hmm. So even on the other side, when you don't make parts, you have the potential to make double the parts because you have 2 different things to keep track of now, as opposed to the single source like ProShop has.
Yeah.
So sort of the inverse of, oh no, we never made those. Oh no, we did it twice, right?
Yeah, or somebody writes a purchase order, then you find out somebody already wrote a purchase order because you're both working on the same thing.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So next, so we've ordered, we've done our initial order entry. We've tried to cut out as much lead time as possible there. Now we're going to get into sort of our detailed, manufacturing, engineering, and planning processes. Again, trying to eliminate tribal knowledge using templates. So Brian, why don't you share a few things on this topic?
Yeah, so we're not talking too much about templates here. We're mentioning them. A template is really one of the tools in the toolbox to replicate data very fast. But another way to think about templating is standard work, right? What are the standard things that we're going to do? So anytime we're talking about that, whether it's setup information and tooling information or what have you, you can have templates or you can have standard work that you draw from to make this process a lot faster. I imagine the vast majority of people on this call today probably do that anyway. Just they do that in a system that they've kind of built or structured, whether that's official or not. So again, it's one of those things that people tend to do on their own. So here you can see a couple of screen grabs from the ProShop environment. And in this case, this is something that we can be thinking about in terms of a production job for a milling shop. So it's got all of the setup notes there, some quick little screen grabs or pictures of the tooling we're going to use, linked over into your tooling library, your fixturing library. What kinds of run descriptions or sequence descriptions do we need to have for somebody on the shop floor? And by building this into that planning, or maybe it's a programmer, building it into that process, again, that means that when somebody gets the job on the shop floor, they know exactly what they need to do. They know where to put the vise. They know how to set their zeros. They know, what to torque the vise to, etc., or any of the other data that they need. And of course, everything is cross-referenced and linked, at least in the ProShop environment, so you can quickly find the data about it. If you needed to know where a fixture was stored, not a problem, it's displayed right there. We move into a tool list. So cutting tools is something that people often just do ad hoc. They often say, hey, I need to order this, or let me go to the drawer or the bin or the toolbox and see what I have. And that's what I'll use for the job. But if you have some sort of a tool library, then you can pull from that and know what tools you need for what do you have? What tools do you generally keep on the shelf? Where are they? What jobs are they used on? And then quickly provide people information. Well, this is how you set it up. We've got 13 tools in the shop. So looking at that top B769 tool there, we've got 13 in the shop. We know that it's going to be in a balanced mill chuck with a 3/4 inch out of holder. And we can see, if we look a little bit down the list on the right, what tools are still on order and what we're expecting to come in the future. So this is just a way that people can kit their tools really fast without, again, having to bug a programmer. Now, we want to be thinking about ways to make this process efficient. So when Chris talked about duplicate entries or doubling up the efforts, one of the things we try to think about are programmers, right? They're in, let's just use Mastercam, kind of the big M. They're in Mastercam and they're picking their tools already. So what are ways that they can pick their tools once in the programming system and then download that, whatever that is, however that looks like, and get that on to the next person. So in ProShop, we have some tools that we can actually read the G code and load the tools in, assuming that our tool libraries match. There are other ways of doing that. You can export a lot of systems, Fusion, obviously Mastercam, many other systems. You can just export an entire tool list and be able to pass that along to the machinist so they don't have to go in and read the G code to find out what tools they're going to use and then go to the bin, etc. So whatever process that you can have that you can implement, just make sure that you've got some way of logging and cataloging your tools to know what you truly do have on the shelf, and it'll make that entire process much smoother and much faster.
Another point I'd just interject there is getting very specific with the tool itself. Avoid using generalized terms for your tools, right? That I need a 1/2 inch end mill with an 1/8 inch rad, right? There's a thousand different tools that match that description, most of which are not going to work in your application. So one thing I know shops struggle with a lot, we did in the early days of our shop, is not being specific, right? Just that general description, and then someone's out on the shop floor, they're doing their setup, they're trying to get that part dialed in, and they just don't have the right tool. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's chattering, maybe it's who knows what. And then you realize at the last minute, we need to get a different type of 1/2 inch end mill with an 1/8 rad, right? And you're driving to a tool vendor, you're shipping it overnight. And when you were talking about these expediting and shipping fees, in the case of when it's happening during a setup or when a job is on the machine itself, the the $40 or $50 red fee from UPS is the smallest amount of that cost. The biggest cost is the fact that your spindle is not turning, right, for an entire 12 or 18 hours or whatever it takes to get that tool the next day. You're just sitting dead in the water. Or possibly you scramble and you tear the job off and you throw another job on to try to keep something moving. Just incredibly expensive, incredibly stressful, and a lot of chaos, which is not very fun.
Yeah, and those are also the kinds of things that if you do any repeat work, that's another use for that process development. We saw that in estimating, where you can label, hey, these are the gotchas that Paul mentioned. Well, you can do the same thing in the standard setup and production process, where if you come across a tool that didn't work, well, obviously you want to get very specific, like Paul said, about which tool you should be using, but also log what the problem was. Hey, we used a 2-flute when we should have used a 4-flute. So in the future, 6 months from now, when that job returns, you don't make the same mistake. One, you've identified the tool, and two, if somebody has issues with the 4-flute tool next time, they're not going to go backwards and try a 2-flute because you have it in that log of, hey, that didn't work. We already tried that. We were there. It didn't work. Maybe now we need to change the holder or something along the way.
Yep.
Inspection. There's another thing that often doesn't get thought about until the inspector has the part in his hands or until the machinist is ready to check the part. So we want to be thinking about the inspection planning process, again, before the part gets to the machine. If you have something slated and you know what the inspection plan is, you know what tools you're going to need, all of that can be preset to where the operator or the inspector can just go right to the list. They can fill out everything that they need to fill out. And recognize when something is in tolerance, out of tolerance, without having to do all of that figuring while the machine is waiting for the results, right? Again, this is something that can be done ahead of time and reduce that amount of time from that first part in hand to, yep, that's good, let's go, or hey, we need to make these few adjustments and these changes.
Yep.
I just want to say
yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I say we saw a pretty good increase in our delivery times by doing some of this inspection stuff ahead of time. So we found we were over inspecting quite a bit of parts, with Deltronics sets and, checking holes to the 10th, when in reality a go, no go could do the same job. So by doing this ahead of time, you have time to order these custom gauges, which are really not that expensive. But when you do get to inspection, you can save, in one case, we saved hours per part just because we had the appropriate gauges by the time we finished machining the first part. So this is one of those things that it's a very small detail, it seems like, but it can have a really big impact on the back end when you're trying to get things out the door.
Yeah, and I know a lot of shops deal with a lot of waiting and queue time going into the QA department, right? Where the first part is off the machine, someone hands it into QA waiting to get a buy off, and they're just sitting waiting for sometimes hours or longer. And part of that's because QA is building that inspection plan right as they get those parts. And so because QA is often such a bottleneck, anything we can do to remove that bottleneck process and make it much quicker are just going to increase the velocity of all jobs through the shop, which is one of those wastes we want to get rid of. And then of course there's also the last minute scramble when you realize that you have this special thread gauge that you need. You didn't realize it because you didn't do the planning up front. And so again, your parts are sitting waiting while you overnight that special gauge.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I mentioned visibility a little earlier. So this is where a lot of this stuff comes into play. It's great to have these, but the other side of this is you need to be able to quickly know where anything is at any point in time. Again, without having to go and find folders and bug people, etc. So things like what we're looking at here would be a planner queue. This is my queue to see which jobs that I'm the planner on, what's the planning status, my programming status, what's the purchasing. You can see on the right-hand side, all of my purchasing icons, they're all color-coded. So at a glance, I can be working from this list every day and at a glance know the exact status of all of my purchasing, know when my scheduled start date is, and I could include on this list if I wanted to, because we can customize these things. I could include who's the programmer. So if I know that a program is not done, but I see the machine time or the scheduled start date coming up, I can go work with them directly. But just, it's really about, in some fashion, whether you're a planner, purchasing agent, or scheduler, just having some way to have visibility about what's going on in the terms that make sense to you. Obviously, this list isn't going to help somebody over in receiving, right? You want the receiving person to be able to look at the jobs that are supposed to be coming in today, or maybe I say jobs, but the materials that are coming in today, or maybe the things that are actually late that maybe they want to be calling vendors about and saying, hey, you didn't deliver yesterday, what's going on with this? So having those types of things identified for each role in the process is going to help everybody quickly spot things that are out of whack and get them addressed and hopefully fix them before they cause major issues.
Yep, you bet.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, no, go for it.
Oh,
You're
okay,
going great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we talked a little bit about schedules before. So it was the same view that we were looking at before, but on the schedule, this is something that should be maintained, obviously, on a regular basis, which it should be daily. However, it shouldn't be, for most companies, it shouldn't be a full-time job. It should be something that somebody can approach. We can see what's going on. We can address the changes that we need to address, whether that's going back to estimating and sales and saying, yeah, that doesn't really fit. It doesn't, it bumps out all these jobs, or going to the planners and saying, hey, this job is coming up tomorrow. It's not planned. It's not ready to go. I need you to get onto the program, et cetera, or I'm going to have to pull something else in. But being able to quickly identify those things, make changes on the fly, and keep everyone at the machines, keep them working on the things that they need to work on, and not, again, that this is choosing where to wait, right? So if I were to look at this and say, well, the next job isn't ready, I may pull up a different job that is ready, even though it's not due as soon, because I'm choosing to wait, or I'm choosing to have the job that's not ready wait in a different spot rather than having my machine wait for that job to come from planning or come from programming and be ready, et cetera. So again, it's something that everybody knows needs to be done. However, spending a little bit of time to review that process, what you're doing now, and trying to drive that down and be very, very efficient will free you up to work on the things that hopefully are going to be the bigger ticket items rather than sitting at a schedule all day long.
Yeah, and we have a question or more like a comment in the chat. Can we see what the ProShop, what schedule edits look like inside of ProShop? And if we do have time, we hopefully will get to a little bit of a live portion, and Brian could certainly show you how you make some edits. One of the key things I wanted to mention here is, because we're looking at a finite capacity version of our schedule, when we actually have scheduled hours on the machine, and then of course each job or operation and how long that's going to take, and we overlay that onto our calendar, you can relatively easily see jobs that are 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks out, if it looks like they're going to be late based on the queue of work that you have currently going on. And of course, everything changes all the time, which is why the schedule itself is fed by the actual productivity of the shop in our case, right? So if a job goes sideways and your setup takes a lot longer than you think, that will automatically reflect in when that job is going to finish and how that affects the starting and ending times of all the other jobs coming up for weeks on end. As you're talking about this, Brian, I'm thinking of all these other webinars, and maybe we can include the links when we send this recording out. We did a webinar on setup reduction, right? So if you can cut your setup times in half by prepping and kitting and doing all the things that are so important for reducing setup time, that's just more lead time that you have at the end, where you don't need to maybe expedite your anodizing process. And then the webinar we did on oh geez, it just escaped me. It'll come back to me. But yeah, there's all sorts of webinars that are pertinent to this exact conversation. There's go a little deeper into particular, one part of the schedule or another.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, yeah, and must leave by date. So this is something that is elusive to a lot of people. A lot of shops don't really know when something has to leave. So obviously they know, generally speaking, how long it takes to ship something to the customer. They might know how long something takes at outside processing, or how long it takes to ship to the outside processor. But the key here is that we want to put all of that together and know, hey, this work order has to leave by the 29th to maintain its schedule. And that could be things like the anodizing process and the shipping. It could be that after anodizing, there's more assembly work that has to be done. So all of those things are going to compile into some sort of what we call it in ProShop, we call it a must leave by date. And having that there, and in our case, calculated, where you can reference it at any point. And then we actually do drive that back to the schedule in a little bit more detail on the scheduling side to be able to see by operation, when does each operation successively need to finish to support its following operations. But having some idea of essentially your drop dead dates, that's what that is. What is my drop dead date? And if I don't hit it, I know I'm going to be late, or I'm looking at some sort of an expedite. So knowing that, again, early as possible, impact on being able to actually perform to the level that you need to perform to.
And if you're working with an ERP or some system that only really displays due dates, I think people earlier in the process and upfront just get a false sense of security. They're like, oh, that's really far out, we're okay still. But when you add everything back up, right, including the queue time through final inspection and various other things that are going to take time, it's very easy to not realize that you are actually already behind schedule when the due date is still weeks and weeks away.
Right.
All right, this is a slide that actually, or a picture that one of our customers sent us, where they've put up big TVs all throughout their shop. In this case, we're looking at shipping and inspection dashboards. So people just in those departments can easily see, based on lead time and priority of that must leave by date, what needs to be sent out today, right? Or finished through the inspection department today. And just by providing that level of visibility to everyone has just had a huge positive impact in how much they're scrambling. And in fact, this is from the customer that I was mentioning that does a lot of quick turn work. So they quote those expediting fees as part of their standard quoting process. But more and more often, they're not actually having to spend it because they have such good visibility and can keep jobs moving through quicker that they just get to keep that as extra profit, which is awesome. Yeah, so Chris, would love to have you maybe just share a little bit more. I know our next slide is some of those real talking points, but the results that you've seen by focusing on all this stuff has been pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a shock because we kind of went from, I would say, more of an ad hoc system to following some of the defined processes in ProShop. So, by defining how you run the jobs through these, the estimating and order entry and even process development, as Brian said earlier, you might save an hour here or 2 hours there. And eventually what started happening is jobs started getting set up on the machines before I even knew about it. So some of this stuff was really setting up for the guys on the shop floor to do their jobs. And they stopped waiting for all that front office stuff to happen. I think Paul, I mentioned at one point I walked out in the shop and we were 3 or 4 jobs ahead of where I thought we were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
And it really comes down to all the planning. So previously, a guy would walk up to me and ask me what the next job was. Where's the material? Do we have tooling? And it got to the point where he knew where the material was. He knew what the next job was, and he didn't really need me anymore, right? All the sequence detailing, the setup notes, and even going back to the purchase orders, they knew what material was ordered. They knew where it was. They knew whether or not it was in-house or not. And if it wasn't, they could move on to the next job. Right. So all of those little things started to add up to a significant reduction in the time it took us just to get jobs on the machine.
And can I ask, from the machinist perspective, because I have a particular interest in that.
Yeah.
But from the machinist perspective, how did they receive that? I mean, was it right away they were thrilled? Was it something that they transitioned into, or what do they think about it now? What did you see out on the shop floor for machinists?
Yeah, and I think there's a big distinction in ProShop. Some of the other systems and the system we were running felt very siloed. So the information kind of was at the top, and we had to push it down. And that was really frustrating for the guys on the floor, because they're almost in the dark about what their next job is. And these guys are professionals and they want to do a good job. So by making a lot of this information available to them, they really embraced ProShop rather quickly, just because they had more of a sense of what was going on in the shop without bothering me. Right? There's always this sense that if you come into my office, you were bothering me because I had so much, so many things to do. But realistically, do I need to tell somebody what purchase order this material was bought under? No. That's stuff that they can easily do on their own on the shop floor now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And about purchasing, can you just maybe elaborate a little bit on what happened? You had a purchasing position that you realized was not necessary and was actually adding additional lead time to your process?
Yeah, so we had a position here dedicated just to buying material. And a lot of that came down to how we were recording the information in the system, where the quotes were, and then even writing the purchase orders, manually typing all the information out. And we got to the point that person became less and less busy, because
You
a lot of
mean
information
after implementing ProShop, you mean?
after implement, yeah, because a lot of the information is there, so you're not doing double entry. And we started to realize that we're really paying someone for something that we didn't need to pay somebody to do. So when we started doing purchasing at the planning stage, so the planners then would write the actual material POs, and then we eventually eliminated that position.
Mm-hmm. And that also, not only did you save the labor of that person, but I think you mentioned to me, you actually, on average, you were ordering material earlier than you used to. So it came in with plenty of time, so you had more flexibility with your machining.
Yeah, it was generally coming in earlier, and it was coming in correctly. What often happened is, if we did any process improvements and changed fixturing or changed the machine we were running parts on, the stock had to change, right? A common example is you go from, multiple operations in a vise to some sort of 5-axis or rotary operation. You need extra stock. So before, if we had to make those changes, you had to track down the paperwork, find it in that stack on the desk and hope that person didn't buy material yet, right? Update the traveler, find all the other copies of the traveler you had on the floor to update that change, and then go ahead and buy your material. But now, since the planners are doing the buying, they're generally the ones that choose what machines these go on and can make that change ahead of time.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
Let's jump to the next slide there, Brian. So I think we've already talked a little bit about all of these things. Let's just see here. Oh, yeah, Chris, you mentioned that you're not keeping raw material inventory really anymore. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm sure many companies do to overcompensate for expediting is to stock material in-house, right? So if you've got these jobs coming up, well, I'm just going to buy extra because eventually I'm going to use it. And I think we all know, for a variety of reasons, that's kind of a bad idea. Because we were able to get some of this material planning done so early, we would have our vendors start cutting material. We didn't have a dedicated person in-house cutting stock, but it was almost 8 hours a day our saws were running inside the company just to prep material for the machines. And oftentimes it was the vendors didn't have time to cut the bar for us, right? We needed the material the next day. Well, then we'll just cut it in-house as the machine's running.
Mm-hmm.
But because we were able to order the material, sometimes 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, we could afford the time for the vendor to cut the stock. And then we were able to focus more on the machining of the parts instead of just blanking bars of material out.
And do you feel that even though you're going to spend a little bit more on that pre-cut material, it more than saves the cost and lead time of cutting it in-house? Or how do you think about
Yeah,
that?
so I mean, there's a couple of hidden costs with cutting stock in-house. If you have guys cutting stock that are also running machines, you run the risk of the machine sitting as they're collecting stock from the saw. And really, when we started looking at all those hidden costs, the cost to have the vendors cut the material was pretty insignificant compared to some of the losses we were seeing. So we actually ended up increasing profitability just because we weren't doing the cutting anymore.
Right. And then another point here about having that lead time and being able to communicate better to your customers and your vendors. I mean, I know in our shop, our vendors really appreciated when we weren't pushing them super hard all the time, right? Yeah. They're more likely to actually do us a favor on the more rare occasion where we really do need some help, as opposed to every single job or almost every job being an absolute firefight every single time. And they're just sick and tired of us kind of beating them up, right?
Yeah.
So I think they become a more trusted partner and are willing to help you out when you really do need that help when something goes sideways.
And we've got a couple vendors that, because we can kind of give them realistic lead times, if there is that one case that you need to expedite material, they may say, listen, you guys are a really good customer of ours. Normally we would charge you for the expedite, but in this case, I'll pay the shipping charges on this or something like that. So, it helps develop that partner relationship with vendors instead of just that transactional, I'm just buying from you and you're supplying me kind of relationship.
Yeah, great points. All right, I know we have only about 9 minutes left. Yeah, Brian, you want to see if you can pull up a live system and we'll look at a couple of things there?
Yeah. So I think one of the questions was editing schedules. Was that right? Okay. Yeah. Let's take a quick look at that. I'll open that up and we'll be able to see. I just got a couple quick machines here. But essentially on the Gantt charts, some things to remember here are that when a new work order is created in ProShop, it's pulling information either from the historical data from what we call the part record or the master router. So we know which machine something goes on, the setup time, the minutes per part. And then, of course, we know the work order quantity. So what happens upon creation of a new order is the order comes in and it gets placed on the schedule. There's a few different rules that we use in ProShop to do that. Most of the time, it's just going to go to the end of the schedule. When we see it come in, we can make adjustments and know, okay, well, this one, for an example, this one is red. I know that that's not going to be done in time. It's passed, it's calculated. This is that must leave by date. So it's telling me operation 50 has to finish by 12/20 to support operation 60. So that's the next subsequent operation. So I could just do a quick drag and drop, rearrange these things, and that's going to reshuffle. And this is a finite system, so it's not going to allow me to double book anything, but it's going to show me the impact that has. And again, when I look at this and I see that this job here, this work order with these two operations, the color code on that tells me it's not ready. So these actually relate right into those planner checklists where I can see based on those priorities, what's been done, whether or not the job is cleared for the shop floor, et cetera. And I know that based on these color codes, that job is not ready. So again, I can pull that up and see what impact does it have. If I push these two jobs out, it looks like everything still fits. If I wanted to change resource and say, yeah, this particular job right here, I don't want it on this machine. I want to move it to another machine. Not a problem. I can just mouse over this and then choose which resource I want to move it to. It's going to ask me, are you sure?
And before you click OK on that, we had a customer ask, how do you add phantoms? That's the exact same way, right? That drop-down list included building a phantom right in that same spot. So
right.
Slight diversion, but to answer that question, that's how you do that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put that in and we can move that around. Maybe it's going to be for this customer and it's, whatever this part number is. Oh, whoops, sorry. Open that back up. How many and it's going to be, say, 20 hours, something like that.
You
A
can
few
add
different
notes,
options.
obviously.
Yeah, adding any notes. So there I can see, okay, that's where that goes. And then again, if I decide I don't want that there, whether it's this job or this job, I can move that to a different machine.
And one of the important parts of keeping the schedule maintained is having the actual productivity of the job that's currently on the machine be as reflected as as real time as possible. So as a machine, as a job is running on that top job in the very top corner there, as that's running on the machine and people are recording how many parts have been completed, that's automatically updating the schedule, which again feeds into all the other starting and ending times of everything else.
Right.
And I just remembered the other webinar that I had in mind. It was that Factory Friday that we did with True Life, where they are, 100-person shop with 35 machines on 4 different shifts, and they schedule about 1 hour a day. So
yeah. They just bought like 7 new machines, by the way.
Oh, did they? Wow. So Peter asks here, please explain what a phantom is. A phantom is just a placeholder. It's not a real job. It's sort of a fake job, but it represents some time maybe of a job you're estimating or something else you want to throw in there to see what it looks like. So it's sort of a what if scenario in some ways.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, a placeholder is the best way to think about that. And of course, there's some advanced functions. There's some features that I don't actually have turned on in this system that allow me to see conflicts between subsequent operations. So if I'm doing things in a certain sequence or priority, there's some ways to turn on features to see when those things are out of sequence. Bulk editing and again, several other advanced functions that we simply don't have the time to get into today.
Yeah. In fact, with about 4 minutes left or 3, we should jump back to our slides and just kind of start wrapping things up here. So yes, same slide as earlier. Hopefully we've demonstrated that if you are more proactive about this planning process, about all the things we talked about, it will lead to more profit. It will lead to spending less time scrambling. It will allow you more free time to do what you want to do. And we've seen that just over and over and over again with clients that have really implemented these concepts using ProShop.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess one of the main key takeaways is be proactive, not reactive, right? Just that a little bit of the timing of where you wait, where you're doing something. And sometimes when we're talking to folks early on, they're like, I don't have time to do that early on, right? I'm too busy to do that. I'm just going to do it later. That is the absolute most backwards way to think about it.
Yeah, the tyranny of the urgent, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So we made a little tracker template. Sarah's going to share that in the chat. Thank you, Sarah. We will also email a link to this when we send out the recording. If some companies have a really good handle on exactly what they spend on all their expediting and overnight fees, a lot of companies don't. So if you don't have a good way to track this, copy this down, and whether you even print it on paper or use it, as a spreadsheet, just jot down the job, what you're spending on a fee, and total that up. And I think you'll be surprised at how much money you're actually spending on these kind of fees. I mean, I know we've talked when we do all of our videos and testimonial videos, I often ask this question, and it's amazing how many clients have said, kind of like that one from Pioneer Cuts earlier, that they're spending less money on ProShop than they used to spend entirely on expediting fees, and it's more than paid for it just in that one thing alone. So
you have to measure it to improve it, right? So if you're not measuring it, you really don't know, and you don't know what you can do and what it means when you do improve it.
Yeah. All right. So for those of you on here that are new to us and ProShop, we'll just quickly just go ahead and click through these slides, Brian. So my partners and I started a machine shop called ProCNC in '97. We started building Excel worksheets to help organize everything. We quickly just realized we were going to outgrow those. After researching lots of ERPs, we just decided none of them were going to be good enough for a job shop like us. So we started developing ProShop in 2000, grew for many years, very strongly, had our very first customer for ProShop, who was our biggest machine shop customer at the time, back in 2008. And then eventually decided to sell the shop and go full-time into software in 2014, and then started up ProShop in 2016. So, and let's see, what do we have on this slide here? Oh yes, so just another one of those customers, and we can also include links to various videos when we send out this recording. This was a client that had very accurate tracking of what they spent on the various fees, and they said they saved 93% of those after implementing ProShop. So pretty huge. Yeah, Pioneer Cuts, same thing, more than ProShop cost them. And then East Branch, as Chris has shared with us here. I think the numbers, Chris, 32,000 that first year in total, and about 20 was expediting fees, and about 12 was overnight shipping charges. Is that about right?
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus not having that overhead position, pretty nice
Yes.
ROI there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we've been answering questions kind of all the way along. There was one that asked about setting up the dashboards. Must be a ProShop client already. We actually are going to do another webinar about dashboards on January 12th. We're gonna have 2 clients joining us for that one, talking about how it's changed their lives. But so look out for that one. And thank you all very much for joining us today. Hopefully that was informative. Hopefully you can take some of these ideas and go implement them, tomorrow in your own shop, and help you get more proactive and spending less money on all this expediting. So yes, thank you, Chris, for joining us. Thanks,
No
Brian,
problem.
for running the slides.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all on the next one.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Have a good day.